Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, my name's James Digby. I'm the MD of Bright. We are a marketing agency for the education sector. We run about 5,000 campaigns a year, a combination of attracting pupils, customers, parents, staff, a whole range of different things. But typically, we divide things into the recruitment of staff and the attraction of parents, pupils, and customers. We will be going through today a little bit about what diversity inclusion is, what it could mean for the education sector, why it's important to consider. We'll talk a little bit about the practicalities of it. There's no point in just kind of defining these things. It's a case of how do you create a strategy to actually implement it. We'll talk a little bit about why words are important. We'll go through some information about job adverts, employer branding, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about unconscious bias, which is the topic that comes up most with diversity inclusion, and just touch on towards the end how you can have inclusive interviews and an inclusive interview process. So with regards to diversity and inclusion, it's important to be looking at how you can make your organization or school or business open to as many people from different backgrounds as possible. For me, I think that's the inclusive element that feels really important. It should be whatever somebody's background, they should see your job adverts, and if they're suitable for that job, they should feel comfortable in applying. There's a lot of different areas. So you could be focused on encouraging people from different genders, race, age, class, upbringing, religion, whatever it might be. But typically, I think that if you were to consider diversity inclusion as diversity of thought, then the other elements tend to kind of come in, because to get diversity of thought, you need people from different backgrounds. So consider what it means for you as an organization. If you're struggling with that, do feel free to email me. I'd be very happy to help you. But for most people, I think the goal really should be that if there's a suitable candidate out there and they see your job advert, they feel comfortable in applying and they feel attracted to working for you as an organization. And it's really important that diversity inclusion is considered. And what I would say is that the clients that seem to have done particularly well during the pandemic, they're the ones that had a diverse way of thinking. They had a good range of people from different backgrounds. They had people from different situations. And they tended to do well because when there was a crisis, people could bring different ideas to the table. They could come with different suggestions. And those organizations that weren't diverse, perhaps they had a habit of recruiting people from the same background, from the same type of university, from the same educational environment. So maybe they were just recruiting from independent schools because they were an independent school. Maybe they were just recruiting from businesses for their educational business that were a particular size or a particular type. Whatever it might be, those organizations and businesses and schools, they struggled the most. Research has shown that people are more productive when they work in diverse teams. They're happier. They have more support because there's people that can support them in the different areas and the different challenges that come along. Diversity inclusion is also now seen as a way to help you achieve some of those ethical goals that you may have set yourself as an organization or business, especially as that's now becoming such an important part of people's brand. It's very difficult to position yourself as an ethical business or school or organization if you're not recruiting in a diverse and inclusive way, if you're not making everybody feel comfortable in applying for your job role. It does show that there is significant motivation for people to do a good job when they work in a inclusive environment, and therefore people tend to be more innovative. They come up with better ideas. They come up with ideas more regularly. So aside from just doing things for the fact that you feel that it's the right thing to do, there is also a good business case to doing this. And sometimes you will need to be able to use these facts to encourage people within your organization to get on board with diversity and inclusion, and not just to see it as a nice to have, but an essential part of your plan. It's also, from many people's perspective, it's also important to represent the community that you work within. That might be the student body, it might be the students and the parents and the pupils and the customers and clients that you work with. It could be a whole range of things, but typically it's those customers and your target audience that you want to be representing in your workforce. And then you do see that when you bring diversity and inclusivity into your recruitment process, you future-proof yourself to a certain degree, because those people bring a wider range of skills, more unique skills, and you don't know whether you're going to need those in the future. And quite often, when there are significant changes, so at the moment there's lots going on within the education world, it's useful to have those skills. So once you've identified what diversity inclusion means for you and really understood why it's important, you then need to get buy-in to this as a project, as a piece of work, as an area of recruitment, so that you can weave it throughout the recruitment process, which leads on to creating a plan. So I think it's really important to set yourself a goal. From my point of view, I think that this needs to be something that you're going to be able to measure. It needs to be something that you can say, okay, we're 50% there, or 70% there, or 100% there, or we've achieved our goal, and we're moving on to the next thing. For me, I would typically avoid this being a particular target for a demographic. I wouldn't say, oh, we need to recruit X number of people from a particular race or X number of people from a particular background. I think the goal of diversity and inclusion really should be that everybody feels comfortable in applying for your job roles, and therefore it probably needs to be something that's reasonably broad. I would do this by looking at your target audience, looking at the demographics that you've got the ability to recruit from, and then using your equal opportunities information. I would be saying, okay, we need to make sure that we're getting 80% in terms of matching our applicant figures and our applicant demographics to the target audience that we're recruiting from. That's the easiest way to track this across the board. So there are a range of different areas that you could do that for, but typically if you've got a fairly standard equal opportunities form, you could do it for each of the areas that you have on that equal opportunities form. And there's lots of statistics out there that you can benchmark yourself against. And potentially you could even be looking at local demographics and taking that into consideration. I do know a lot of schools that have looked at this, and when they have checked that data, they're actually doing really well for diversity and inclusion, because their student body, their staff body, the community that they recruit from, the community that they get their students from, they've all aligned very nicely. Where you have this situation where you start this project and you're actually already doing very well, from my point of view, that doesn't mean that you've ticked that off. It means that you should be promoting that through your employer brand. So if you feel that you're already ticking a lot of these boxes, make sure that you are talking about it, because a good portion of the organizations out there is struggling with this as a concept, struggling with this as a goal. So if you do your research and you find out that you're actually doing really well so far, make sure that is weaved into your employer brand. So once you've got your goal, and you know maybe a few of the areas that you're maybe underperforming in terms of the communities that you want to be able to recruit from, or you want to have represented in your recruitment process, we've written down some tips about where to start. So I would be looking at your past recruitment adverts, and I would look to see how you can speak to a broader range of candidates and demographics. You can put your job adverts through a gender decoder, which I believe we're going to go through in slide 11. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But these tools will help you to identify whether in general you're going to be more attractive to a particular gender. They also have them for different backgrounds, a range of different backgrounds, and they'll help you use wording that is appropriate. And so that's a really great place to start, because you can do that retrospectively. You can put your job adverts through those things and you can find out what they show you. I think that once you've identified those areas that you want to maybe be encouraging people to apply from, particular demographics that you may be finding that are underrepresented in your applicant numbers, start to consider where those people are. So, for example, if you've got a reasonable size, say you're a trust or an educational organization, you have a reasonable size IT team, you might be looking to recruit more women into your technology roles. There are job boards just for women. There are platforms for women looking to progress their career within technology. There are communities for women within technology. You could be using these areas to encourage applicants from women who are suitable for your technology roles. At the beginning, this is going to be very, very difficult, because you need to be honest with your advertising. You need to be honest with your employer branding. It's very difficult to promote yourself as a place for women to work in technology if they're already underrepresented within your workforce. But as time goes on, and as you recruit more people from particular backgrounds, it is possible to get a bit of reputation in these areas. And you will find that on those community websites, your job adverts will perform better because you start to get a reputation. Your marketing, your employer branding, they represent better the types of people that you're looking to attract to your organization. You could be encouraging diverse employees to refer their connections, so it might be people from particular backgrounds. You could do this in a formal way. You could be doing this in a direct way, so you could be going to them and asking for that, or you could just be using statements on your website, statements in your adverts, quotes, and so on and so forth from those diverse people that you're looking to attract more people from similar backgrounds to your organization. And so when people read that, they're more likely to apply for your job roles. So you might be an independent school, for example. You might have identified that you don't have many people from state schools, and therefore you lack perhaps diversity of thought. You could be using case studies of people who have come from state schools to work in your independent school, and how they've progressed through the process of doing that. For bigger organizations and trusts, we've definitely seen a significant uptake in apprenticeships and early career groups. So you could be having diversity programs where you're looking to support people from particular backgrounds, or a certain percentage of that intake comes from a particular background. It's very difficult, in my view, to do that without feeling like you're targeting people. So I think be very cautious with this one. Only do this if you feel that you're really, really lacking in representation from specific backgrounds. And then once you've started to identify the areas that you're perhaps strong in and the areas that you need to work on, I would be building this into your employer brand. So that comes from videos, that comes from photos, that comes from testimonials, that comes from case studies. So how have people from different backgrounds progressed through their career, for example? How have they improved their knowledge and their experience from working with you, and how did they feel that they fitted in to that community? Um, it's important from a HR point of view. So for anybody from a HR background here, it's important that your policies are flexible and meet the needs of a diverse community. I'd be doing this as soon as possible, so that when people come in, they're asking you questions, you've got those answers. It's very hard to come across as inclusive if you're not sure about particular religious holidays, whether people are going to be getting that off, or whether they can work on religious holidays that perhaps aren't suitable for them. So I think look through all of these policies. There's lots of information out there about this, and work out how that's going to fit within your organization. You could use blind application forms and interviews. The most common step for people when they're looking at diversity and inclusion is to bring in blind application forms. My view on them is that you'd be better off focusing on unconscious bias and training around that, because I do feel that when you hide key information from the application forms, if there is unconscious bias there, you typically just bring it to the next stage of the recruitment process rather than the shortlisting stage. So I'm not really sure it helps in making you a more diverse organization. But sometimes it can bring in candidates that you otherwise wouldn't have interviewed. And that does have its advantage because you could be considering them where you might not have been able to meet with them. And then I think when you're screening for candidates, just rethink the factors that you're actually screening for. So, for example, when you're looking through CVs and covering letters, are you screening people out for spelling and grammar mistakes? If so, is that really necessary? Are you ruling out people who are neurodiverse, maybe people who are dyslexic, for example, and they won't need to be having that quality of writing skills? Once you've then got your plan in place for diversity inclusion, I think it's important to then be looking at this from a campaign level for recruitment. So the first step really would be job analysis. And job analysis is focused around gathering the requirements for your job role. Start to consider at this stage whether everything you have is going to be required. And the way to do this would be write a list of all of your requirements with your hiring manager, or if you're the hiring manager, write a list of all the requirements that you think you need. Go through and say, if I had somebody that met all of this criteria except for the first one, would I consider interviewing them? If that's the case, then if you would interview them, you can move that requirement down to desirable rather than essential. And by doing this for every single requirement, what you'll end up with is a list of essential and desirable criteria. And this really helps in job descriptions and job adverts because it allows people to quickly rule themselves in or out of the process. And it also means that you typically encourage people to apply who may have been put off if you just had a very long list of requirements because they were looking to rule themselves out of the process. Um, be very clear with what you require in terms of qualifications. I think quite often people say we need X, Y, and Z or relevant experience. Maybe give some examples of what that experience could be, and you'll find that people will find it easier to apply for a role, and you'll get more candidates, and therefore you'll have more diversity in your applicants. The next step then is to write your job adverts in a gender neutral way, write them in a way that's attractive to a wide range of people. We're going to come on to a gender decoder and what that means for you. But it's important to understand that people from different backgrounds are attracted and put off to job roles for in different ways. And there's a kind of a bit of a science to this that we can talk about. Shortlisting is a time-consuming process. I think that it's really important to make sure that at this early stage there's no bias coming into the process, or perhaps no rushing of this process. I really like it when people are aware of a bias that they have or a lack of experience that they have. Maybe they've only worked in, going back to the previous example, maybe they've only worked in independent schools, and they bring in somebody who's got experience from a different background, maybe from a business background, maybe from a state school background. What that will do is it will give you a second opinion, but from somebody who thinks in a different way to you. So hopefully from that shortlisting experience, having a diverse panel, you'll find that you shortlist people you might not otherwise have shortlisted. My favorite kind of question to ask people when training them around assessing candidates is about whether they can tell within the first 5 minutes whether a candidate's going to get the job or not. It's of course impossible to say in 5 minutes whether somebody's a great maths teacher or technologically experienced enough to be an IT manager. Typically, these things are biased. That gut feeling comes from the fact that you connect with some people, you connect with people who are more like you, and you've got a natural feeling that you can't connect with somebody who is completely different to you. So I think training managers in assessing people in a way that they're not relying on gut feeling, but they're relying on the science of assessment will really help. And a shortlisting criteria grid is the best way to do that. So get them and the rest of the panel to score candidates on essential and desirable criteria. And then selection, make sure that everybody that's had a chance to meet with the candidate and has scored them based on the experience that they've provided evidence for gets the say in the selection process. So gather the scores together, look at who the first, second, and third options are for everybody, and talk about that until you've come to some kind of understanding of why there's differences between those scoring. Maybe people saw something that you didn't, maybe people saw something that nobody else saw. So make sure that when you do that, if you still don't feel comfortable, maybe give that candidate the opportunity to provide a bit more evidence so you have clarity and you're making an informed decision. There's always a lot of administrative work around onboarding. So to add diversity and inclusion into the mix for that could be a difficult ask, really. But it is important. There's no point in focusing on diversity and inclusion throughout recruitment, and then when you get to onboarding, everything falls down. Look at whether you've got perhaps groups within your community, your employee community, that you can maybe be introducing people to. So if you've recruited somebody from a particular background and you feel that they may be concerned that they're going to not feel included in that community, you could be looking for people from similar backgrounds within your organization to help with that onboarding process. Almost like a buddy system, so that they can ask questions, they can ask things that may be relevant to them. Maybe they're from a particular religion and they want to know how the holidays would work or some of the requirements of their religion would work within that environment. And then make sure that you're surveying candidates, check whether those diverse candidates that you're trying to encourage to apply, whether there's a particular drop-off point, maybe they're not getting shortlisted, maybe they're not getting interviewed, maybe they're not going through the second interview, or they're not accepting offers, whatever it might be. Analyze that data to find out what's going wrong and where it's going wrong. As we have touched on this a number of times, hopefully this is going to make sense, because it is a useful tool, but to know where to kind of start with improving your employer branding and your job adverts, it's important to understand that there are tools out there that can help you and can speed up the process. A gender decoder is just one of many different tools, but it is the one that has grown in popularity. And what it does is it says that male and female candidates typically rule themselves in or out of the recruitment process for different things, for different wording. This isn't, of course, the case for every male and female, but it is basing it on millions and millions of different data points across millions of different job adverts that have gone live. So it's saying, in general, when these words are used, you'll get more male applicants. In general, when these words are used, you'll get more female applicants. And what it aims to do is to remove those words that give you a polarized job advert and give you a neutral advert which is free from those biased words. The research has shown that typically females look to rule themselves out of jobs, so they read through the job advert and they consider what reasons why they're not suitable for it, and men tend to rule themselves in for things that they're not necessarily suitable for. Again, that's just a very broad view, but it is based on the data. So this is just a snippet of data where it shows some of the words that were significantly skewing the applicant numbers towards either males or females. So, for example, the word lead, they found that that typically put off females from applying, and it typically attracted more males for applying for a job role. So you can use this science to make your adverts more neutral. Um, Although these tools are really useful for you as a HR person or a recruiter or even a hiring manager, what the best solution really, and the best way that you can improve your inclusivity and your diversity within your organization is through training. It's about making people aware that everybody does have some kind of bias. And the most common bias really falls into four kind of categories. So affinity bias is about similarity. It's when people automatically feel connected to somebody who looks like them or sounds like them or comes from a similar background. And quite often, this can be nothing to do with looks. It could be an accent. It could be the fact that they went to a similar university or school to that person. So just being aware of that might help some hiring managers to understand why they feel particularly connected, why they have that gut instinct towards a candidate being suitable. Confirmation bias is where you feel that somebody is perhaps right for something, and you're looking for just constant confirmation. So maybe they say something that's a little bit ambiguous, a bit of a grey area, but your confirmation bias encourages you to say, well, actually, I was right. This person is really good because they've said X, Y, and Z, and you're interpreting that to meet your own personal desires, your own beliefs and prejudice. Attrition bias, attribution bias, sorry, is where you assume something without finding out the facts. So, for example, somebody's late for an interview, you might draw your own conclusion that person's disorganized, but you don't know what has happened. Maybe there's been a car crash, maybe there's been something which is outside of their control. So this is where you assume something and you don't actually ask the question why. You don't go into the detail of it, and therefore that person's being unfairly judged. And then the next one is particularly common where you have interview panels. Conformity bias is where you as an individual or an individual starts to conform to the opinions of the majority. And this is really important when you're bringing in people from different backgrounds for the interview panel. You should encourage them to speak up, because it'd be very easy for them if everybody else says, oh, didn't think they were very good because of X, Y, and Z, for that person to think, oh, maybe they missed something, I won't say anything. So do encourage those people to talk up, and do make sure that your interview panels are being fair in their assessment and they're not putting their own twist on things. And then we have unconscious bias in general as a topic. This is the area that I'd be focusing on for training. I think that you can go into the detail that we just have, but in general, this concept of unconscious bias that everybody has is really important. It's saying that from a scientific point of view, people can be biased towards people because they're different to them, because they've got an opinion on them, because they've had their own experience of the world. And being aware of it is enough to significantly reduce it as a risk to your recruitment process. So these are some of the things that you can do to actually reduce that. So we talked about that training aspect. So learning what it actually is and how it looks and how it feels can help you to identify it in your own recruitment process and remove it. Looking at your data, as we talked before, about where are those diverse candidates dropping out of the process, either because of themselves or because your process is ruling them out, and then focus on where those biases are coming in. Look at your job adverts. Make sure, for example, that you're not discouraging somebody from a particular background, maybe women, for example, for applying for your job roles. Do consider blind interviewing. I think maybe there's a lot more to get right before you go to blind interviewing. But it has been shown to work. So you can have your blind shortlisting, and then you can have your blind interviewing. But of course, there's still going to be some bias there. If you can't physically see somebody, you can still hear them. You can still hear their accents and so on and so forth. Um, the more diverse your recruitment team is, the more background that they come from, the more you're likely to get a wide range of opinions, and you're more likely to allow people to be represented in your recruitment process without unconscious bias coming in. And it's really important to encourage everybody and for you yourself to speak up when you think people are being biased. So if somebody's being brought through to a recruitment process, because they're from a particular background, not because they're necessarily suitable, that's the perfect time to talk up. It's not fair on anyone to bring people through a recruitment process knowing that they're not going to get the job just to make it more diverse. If you feel that people aren't being shortlisted because they're not from a particular background or they are from a particular background, then speak up about it. I've quite often seen this about people from particular working environments like the NHS or council. They're sometimes unfairly judged, maybe as being too bureaucratic, for example. But of course, that isn't true. There's hundreds of thousands of people that work for those types of organizations, and you've got a diverse range. Some people could be very bureaucratic, but there will be lots of people that aren't. I would recommend that you have an overview of your recruitment process, and you regularly review it. You look at all those different touch points, you look at where bias could be coming in, you look at your communications, you look at what you're talking to people about, you're looking at what you're asking people. Um, and going full circle back to the beginning, I think diversity and inclusion is next to impossible to implement correctly unless you have very clear diversity and inclusion goals and understand exactly what you're looking to build, exactly what you're looking to achieve. And for me, that means that it needs to be something that is measurable. And then finally, I think just wanted to touch on this because I think it can be difficult to make sure that your interview process in particular is diverse and inclusive. And the reason is because it's quite easy to do this with CVs and covering letters, blind shortlisting, and so on and so forth. But it is difficult to do it for interviews because you can see, you can hear, you can read. You've got a whole range of things that people can be bringing their biases into. So make sure that everybody on the panel understands exactly what their role is and make sure that they have an understanding of unconscious bias. It is really useful to be very clear in the questions that you'd be asking. And if there isn't a good reason for it, I would even be considering sharing those questions with candidates. A, they come better prepared. B, it's more of an advantage to a wider range of people from different backgrounds, for neurodiverse people, people that maybe need time to consider things, and you'll find that your interviews go a lot more effectively because you're focused on the content of the answers rather than helping people understand what you're looking for. Understand as a panel how you're going to be scoring candidates. Are you going to have 0 for no evidence at all and 1 for meets the criteria, or are you going to have 0 for doesn't meet the criteria, 1 for meets some of the criteria, 2 for excels in the criteria, whatever it might be? Personally, I would go for either somebody shows the evidence or some people they don't. And then talk to people about whether there's going to be any additional questions. What should those questions be? They need to be fair and they need to be assessing people on the criteria. That should be your general rule of thumb. Is the question focused on part of the criteria? If not, we'll leave it out. And then finally, explain to people the potential impact of unconscious bias and the impact that it can have on not just the recruitment process, but also you as an organization. That's a lot to cover in just under 40 minutes, but does anybody have any questions at all about diversity and inclusion? Or any of the areas you'd like me to go back over? Perfect. If you do, feel free to email me. I'm going to send the recording to everybody, but feel free to email me any questions that you might have. And I'd be very happy to go through them with you. But I'd also be very happy to work out how these things apply for you as a school or an organization or a business, because it does apply in different ways to different people. I can see that somebody is writing something. So perfect. Well, thank you all very much for attending and for giving up 40 minutes of your Monday morning. As I say, I will send you an email and feel free to come back to me if you have any questions. Thank you all very much.